people are not allowed to say what they think, basically. So I've worked with a lot of teams, and within those teams, you see that sometimes they want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, and we are not saying things that could upset somebody within the team. And so everybody is tiptoeing around the problem. Sometimes all of the team members think that that it's not really a good solution, but they choose this solution anyway because nobody dares to speak up. That would have been a criminal act before COVID-19, and then it became normal. And they posted it on Facebook. I'm like, what? You're locking your kid into his room for 10 days and give him food in front of the door?
That's what fear can do, eh?
If you frame something in a certain way, if you only talk about deaths, for instance, instead of people who survived, then people will focus on the death issue.
Hi, Michaéla.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you.
It's good to see you.
We met I guess we were in Amsterdam, were we? Or Rotterdam? No, we were in Rotterdam.
Yeah.
When I saw you last, and we decided that we'd have a conversation. So thank you very much for agreeing. Why don't you tell my listeners what you've been up to? This is the second podcast I've done with you. And so just tell them what you're doing and how long you've been doing it for.
Yes. Well, I'm a professor of Behaviour and Performance Management at Erasmus University Rotterdam School of Management. And my main idea is to optimize performance. So I thought, what is the main theme that I'm looking at? And that is optimizing performance and happiness of people. And I've been doing this for, I think, 30 years in total. And it started with doing research on superstition in sport. And how sportsmen, like the biggest club in the Netherlands, like Ajax and PSV, these are really big clubs. And I went there and I gave all the players questionnaires about how they optimized or tried to optimize their performance through superstition. And then I went on to do research on reflexivity in team, which is team learning, basically teams thinking about how to optimize their performance, how they can do better next time. And then I went on to do research on goal setting. So I worked with Jordan Peterson. We wrote a paper, and I did a large research in the Netherlands among our students. And the first research was among 700 first-year students, and we tried to optimize their study success, and that was 22% increase in study success. And also the dropout rates went down. And for students with a migration background, we found up to 50% increase in study success, which was a huge...
Yeah, wasn't it the Dutch women were doing the best?
Yes.
And the migrant men were doing the worst. And then after this intervention...
migrant men and women. Actually, there wasn't a lot of, I don't think it was significant a difference between those two groups, but it was a huge difference. And it was a 93% closing of the gap between those groups after 2 years.
So the Dutch women were doing fine the way they were.
Yes.
It was the migrant population that was having more trouble.
Yes, and men, also Dutch men.
And Dutch men as well. And why do you think that is now? It's because now it's been since when was that paper published?
2015, actually.
So what do you think was going on back then that this made a difference?
I think for Jordan, we talked a lot about this, and he said, well, women are just also more agreeable. And I thought it made a lot of sense. So if you I tell my female students, I couldn't really find it, but or really look for this. But when I tell my female students, you have to do this assignment before tomorrow, and then they will say, okay, we'll do it. And then in general, of course, not all of them, but men will say, why do I have to do it? And if they have a good reason to do it, they will do it. And then with the migrant population, what is the case is that their parents tell them to go for a good study, like where they can either earn a lot of money or have higher status. And then the students thinks, okay, they will do their study, but is it my choice in the end? And I found that the students became more committed to their studies if they did the goal setting. So instead of, at first I feared that they would drop out and say, hey, let's do another study. I like psychology more, or sociology, or whatever. I don't want to do management. But I found out that these students thought about, why did I choose this study, and what do I want to get out of the current study that I already chose? So that was really
Yeah,
interesting.
because really, I found through my life that it doesn't really matter what I did. As
Mm-hmm.
long as I did it consciously and completely, it would be helpful to me in my life. So,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
so actually doing the goal setting that you started with
Mm-hmm.
before you did the life crafting, that was what happened. But since
Yes.
then, you've developed a life crafting,
Life crafting intervention. Yes. So
and that's different somehow.
it's different in the sense that I wanted to make a different contrast. So, for instance, contrast an ideal life to a current life, and I wanted them to think about a lot of other things like a network, and I introduced if-then plans. So, for instance, in the second part, that of course students have to look for obstacles, but I thought there's also a lot of literature of Goldwitzer on if-then plans. So what if you do this, and what if a student comes up and asks you to go for a beer the night before the exam, and normally you would
Mm-hmm.
say yes, and now you say no, I want to I'm going to have this beer after the exam, so let's do it tomorrow. And so
Mm-hmm.
these are so I added a lot of things, and I changed the intervention itself, but it's basically still the idea of setting goals, but also in the first part thinking about your ideal life. That's still
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
part of it.
Yeah, no, we'll get more into that. I'd like to go back to this paper that you wrote though on in the time of the lockdowns,
Mm-hmm.
because you wrote a paper in 2020
Mm-hmm.
based on your projections, I guess, of what you thought was going on. And I
Mm-hmm.
found that paper very interesting.
Yes.
So, and I looked at the news today just for a minute before we were going to come online here, and I saw something written in the Western Standard, and they were talking about, so this is now, the federal government, this would be in Canada, deliberately and secretly devised winning communications strategies to downplay injuries and deaths caused by the experimental COVID vaccine. Thus, a secret Privy Council memo released after to access to this information request. The government relentlessly forged ahead on a mission to convince Canadians to get the jab, despite knowing that some reactions to the vaccines were minor to severe, according to a May 2021 report. So these things have come to pass. And I'd like to talk about the paper that you wrote in 2020, previously to when these things are being found out.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What I did actually, I when this whole thing started, I thought, something's going on, and I see a lot of psychological. Let's say it felt like psychological warfare, even
Mm-hmm.
on the population, to make them very afraid, and to push all the messages that something was wrong and that something needed to be done. And what I found really strange is that there was only one solution. So there was one huge problem. All of the societal problems that we have were compressed into one, COVID-19. And I was like, that has
Right.
never been a problem before. So and one solution, and that was what made me very skeptical, because I know, if you have a problem, there's a lot of world problems, but there is never one solution to a problem. I don't know any problem that has only one right solution. Maybe there are 10, or maybe there are 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, okay, let's look into this. And then I found out, and then back then we didn't have any vaccines, but the idea was that we would have the vaccine would be a solution already, but there was no vaccine yet. So I thought, okay, what you have now is measures. So these are non-pharmaceutical interventions, we call them. You would say the vaccine is a pharmaceutical intervention. And then I thought, as a psychologist, there's a lot to say about this whole thing, what's going on. Because the first thing I also noticed is we couldn't deviate from the narrative. There was one current narrative, and that was, okay, there is a deadly disease that needs to be handled, and the only way to handle it is to have all these non-pharmaceutical interventions. And I thought, okay, do these work then? Because I'd never heard of them before, and I knew, I'm not a medical expert, but I'd never heard of them. And I thought, why don't we do all the things like, okay, let's open a window, let's get some fresh air, let's get out, get some vitamin D, let's move, let's do physical activity. And I know also psychologically that really helps. So if people are afraid and in a state of terror management, they need to do something about this. Really, reminders of death all the time.
We were in Greece a month ago.
Yeah.
And all the people who were, I would say, the most senior people on the street were still wearing masks. And they told me that in Greece, the little children are wearing masks as well. So there are, and we traveled extensively over many, many countries. And Greece was the most, it was the most obvious that they were still suffering under this delusion that masks are an answer to their problems. So this is still significant. What you're talking about now, and especially with, I think, climate change and the whole idea that that carbon dioxide is the one thing that we have to battle. It's the same sort of, this is one problem, this is one solution.
Solution. And then I
and
found
there's nothing outside the box.
Yes, and what I found for all solutions, so I haven't looked into the climate change thing, but I have the same feeling, and I can give an example in a minute. But what I see is that the measures taken to combat the problem that's been defined in a certain way by the governments and by, I don't know, all kinds of institutions, that the problem, the solution for the problem makes it worse. So that is, you say, okay, this is the problem, and we are going to do non-pharmaceutical interventions. And then the first thing I found is that there is no evidence that these worked, and that there was a lot of evidence that these were harmful. And I keep seeing that theme over and over again. For instance, and this was really interesting because I was not allowed I was not allowed in the public transportation in the Netherlands anymore. I had a medical exemption from a doctor that I couldn't wear masks. And then I called them and I said, I've been, for 30 years, I've been traveling with public transportation. I don't own a car. So how do I get about? Is there a solution for this problem? And they said, no, the only solution is that you quit your subscription to the public transportation. And I said, this is really strange, isn't it? Because we are not allowed to wear medical masks at that time because there were probably not enough medical masks yet. But you could even get a fine if you were a proper or more or less proper medical mask.
Right.
And then I was like, okay, isn't this strange? Yeah, but we can't do anything about it. And I said, okay, then I quit my subscription and then I wanted to buy a car. And I'm like, this is weird. If you want to fight climate change or at least do sustainable things, I shouldn't be buying a car. And then I was looking for an electric car. And then I found out that electric cars, at least my brother is a mechanic, used to be a mechanic, and he told me that making an electric car is already very, very not environmentally friendly, and that it's not even more proven that it's more environmentally friendly than a car on gasoline.
Right, because you have batteries and you have to get rid of the batteries and you have to charge the batteries. And you have
exactly.
I don't know what else.
Then he told me that all these that these young kids have to get all the stuff out of the the mining, and that these kids would die very young. And then that was the limit for me. I was like, I'm not going to do that. And so I bought a gasoline car, which is also not a great solution, but yeah, that's the only thing available.
Uh-huh. Yeah, right. So there you go. The idea that they had an answer, and then if you try to work within their answer, there's no wiggle room at all. And you talked about something called groupthink in that
Yes.
paper.
Yes. Indeed. The thing is about groupthink is that people are not allowed to say what they think, basically. So I've worked with a lot of teams, and within those teams, you see that sometimes they want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, and we are not saying things that could upset somebody within the team. And so everybody is tiptoeing around the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe sometimes all of the team members think that that it's not really a good solution, but they choose this solution anyway because nobody dares to speak up. And that
Mm-hmm.
psychological safety is lacking sometimes. And then so I thought we were in a big groupthink process where we were really it was said, come on guys, we all need to be in the same direction, it's really important. And do you have another opinion? No, we can't have that, it's too important to for this. But when it gets so important, then it's even more important to value other opinions and to see um, what others have to say or what other experts have to say, because we know from the highest level, like John Ioannidis, for instance, he is a top 10 scientist in the world. And I read I'm working with him actually on a couple of papers, and I read his Wikipedia page, and it's been rewritten as if he is also. We don't know what happened to this great scientist, yeah, because he's not following the narrative, and he never followed the narrative actually, because before the COVID situation, he opposed the smoking industry, so the
Mm-hmm.
tobacco industry. He took on the and yeah, he's just a person who says, okay, if I look at the evidence, it's not good for people, so go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to learn because now we're in more deep water as we go forward because we're not learning from experience, and uh, you would think that this whole world lockdown, not the complete world, because Sweden still opened their doors and had business as usual. And, now we're finding out that their COVID flu counts were there wasn't anybody more suffering there than they were anywhere else. So the whole lockdown didn't help. And actually, like you said, opening the windows and taking vitamin D was exactly what was necessary in the end. And that is what people have been doing forever. I can remember my sister being put outside when I was just a little kid. So because she was sick, and opening the doors in the winter and wondering what my parents were up to, but they were giving us fresh air so that we could get better. So you talked about um, some ideas that you could do, some things that you could do to counteract this, and you talked about a framing effect, brain writing, and you talked about confirmation bias. So you talked about three. So could you talk about the framing effect and what that means, and brain writing, what that is, and the confirmation bias, and how that works into this thinking in more broad ways?
So confirmation bias is basically that you look for evidence that, so you already know, let's say, vaccines will work. So you will only look for evidence that they do work. And and what you also see in the scientific literature, there's a lot of papers that get like a red carpet and get published. There's a very famous paper that has been retracted later, but it was published within 3 hours. And that's impossible. I've never heard of a scientific paper going through a review process and being published within 3 hours of submission, because the submission process takes sometimes
Mm-hmm.
months and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
even years. So that is something. So people will look for, let's say, the measures work, and then they say, see, we didn't get sick, so it
Right.
worked. And so that's confirmation bias. Because how big is the chance that you are sick, and maybe you didn't even notice that you were
Right.
sick.
Right. So
Um,
coming to a conclusion without evidence.
yes, basically yes, and also looking for very specific evidence, only looking in a very specific direction. That will always confirm. That's why it's called confirmation bias. It will always confirm your prediction.
We can talk about the framing effect.
So yeah, if you frame something in a certain way, if you only talk about deaths, for instance, instead of people who survived, then people will focus on the death issue. By saying the same thing, actually, there is a very famous example, and it's really interesting. It's called, and that was called I think it was called the Chinese flu or something. And so people, if you had the same number of survivors, but you say, let's say 20 people died, or 70 people survived, or 80 people survived, then it's totally, people will make different decisions based on the way you frame the
Right.
problem.
And they were saying things like
So
that the ICUs were full.
yes.
Maybe they were
Yeah, it's
full
interesting because,
somewhere, but they weren't full everywhere.
well, actually, it's interesting because in the Netherlands, that's an interesting that you mentioned that, because in the Netherlands in 2015, they halved the number of ICU
Oh.
beds. And it turned out since then, every year, they were full around that same time. So that was one thing. I had a colleague working on the ICU, and who said, I don't see anything different than the
I
years
had a
before.
nephew working in the
And then I
ICU too. He didn't see anything different either.
No, that's interesting. And he was a clinical ethicist, and he also spoke out in the beginning. And later on, he kind of turned a little bit, but he was still saying, hey, the measures are really bad, especially for old people, because they are dying alone. They're in these old elderly care homes. And there's a massive amount of negative effects. While at the same time, I don't see anything at the ICU. But it's interesting. I had a colleague working in Amsterdam, the north of Amsterdam, which is a huge part of Amsterdam. And then I asked, she said, yeah, they're almost full. And I was like, but how many places do you have on the ICU? And she said 4. And I said, when there's 3 people, it's almost full, right?
Yeah. So
How many beds?
there's the framing effect, right? There's the problem with the framing effect. Yeah. And now they found out that a
Yeah.
lot of the elderly people who died, and they said it was COVID, there were 3 comorbidities, and it's a toss-up what they died from, really. You could name it anyway, but they named it COVID to bring the numbers up.
Yeah, if you had a positive test in England, if I'm correct, and 2 weeks later you were run down by a bus and died, then you died of COVID or you were shot in the head.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah. And I don't know if we've learned anything, but I sure hope so. But I think the only way to learn from it is to continue talking about it and to recognize that we were fooled,
true, and I think it's even more than that. And not everybody did that
No.
on purpose, because there's a lot of people buying into the story, and really, on both sides, people thought they were doing the right thing,
right.
actually. What we need, because I think we are in a death spiral effect because of the decision making that's been spiraling out of control. Because, like in an ant mill, sometimes ants, they army ants, they go out and they hunt and they prey together, and then sometimes and they follow each other's pheromones. But sometimes they get up in this spiral, and it's called an ant mill, and they keep on walking and walking
But in a
until they're
circle.
exhausted.
In a circle.
In
So
a
they're not
circle,
going
exactly.
anywhere.
Yeah. No, no. And it's because they keep following each other's pheromones, so they get into the circle. You can even make sure that it happens, but it sometimes happens spontaneously, and it's really dysfunctional at that time. And normally it's functional if they follow each other for preying, but not if they end up in this ant mill, and they get really exhausted and they die. And they push out, it's been noticed that they push out the dead ones and they keep on walking.
And so do you think something like
So-
that is going on in our society?
Yes, I think sometimes people, and it can be one person, it can be a family, it can be a whole group. But I think in society now we have been in this circle of bad decision making, and one decision follows the other. But you keep on going into this endmill. Because I think we are going to do the same with the environment,
Hmm.
and um, we don't really do anything about what already happened. So we have to reverse course, and really quickly, I think. So what I suggested is that we need a turnaround leader, or at least as a society we need to do something. So the people within the society need to think, okay, is this the future we want for our children? Is this really what we want? And is this future leading to an ideal future? So that's why I wrote Letters to the
Hmm.
Future. And everyone can just fill it out and think about how they want to reverse course or do something, and then really pick a problem that you want to contribute to. But for instance, I gave this to my students, and sometimes they write that they want to do something about the climate change problem. But then I think if you look more deeply, what are you exactly going to do? Because what is going to happen now, what we see in the Netherlands, is that they want to get rid of a lot of
Hmm.
farming. And if that happens, then I think we will face a big
Yes,
famine. I don't think eating insects will be, well, it doesn't feel like a good solution. And I don't think there is a problem at the moment that we are fixing
right.
with getting rid of
I
farm.
agree. I agree. Yeah, I just talked to Eva uh, Vlerdingblock,
Karingbroek.
and we didn't talk much about the farmers. We talked about Catholicism quite a bit, but
Okay.
you know, she was rallying the farmers, and
Yes. Yes.
she's only 26
He
years
was at a
old. I think she was
demonstration.
23 when she did that. So I'm looking to her to be a voice for the future. That's for sure.
Yes, definitely. She's been a voice for at least for farmers.
Yes.
And in the Netherlands, there we are the second largest exporter of farming products,
Yes. Right.
and of course also from Finland. But the Netherlands is a very small country, but we export a huge number, and we basically the farmers and their products feed a large part of the population of the world. And if you take that away, then because there is already famine, because the hunger has doubled since 2020.
What do you think is? Where do you
Actually, I
think
told
this mandate is coming from? This is coming from the EU, is it? The headquarters in Brussels?
yes, what I understood is coming from the EU, and they made agreements to cut on
Carbon tax.
carbon
Yeah. Hmm.
emissions. Yeah, and so they said this is the problem, but I think the carbon dioxide is a part of life because the plants use it and they make oxygen out of it. This is at least what I learned at the biology lessons in
Well, there's
school. But
more trees now in the world than there's. I think it's doubled the size of United States. The amount of tree and the
hmm,
trees that are growing in from arid countries. So the CO2 is, by all accounts, it's helping more trees grow. So,
yes,
and Bjorn Lomborg, if you look through his writing and his work, he um, he recognizes CO2, but it's
hmm
like number 21 on a list of things that we could do to help with the world and
hmm
the poor in the world. And CO2 is not the thing to help the poor in the world. It's just going to put them into more deprivation. And so,
well, actually, the problem is that the inequalities have risen so far and have increased a lot, and that's what also got me. Um, yeah, I was really unhappy about that because I've had like the goal setting intervention that Jordan developed, and I and then the inequalities at least in terms of education, were almost
Yeah.
removed. And I think this is a great intervention. Why don't we implement it in all the schools? I didn't see any side effects. It's only a couple of hours of
Yeah.
writing of the students. We didn't ask a lot of them. And then you have these huge effects, because these, if it starts at education and starts in the university or even earlier, then that can help for a full lifetime, because we know that students have higher grades, and we also know that it works, still even works after 4 years,
Right.
because the students get in this upward spiral, and that continues throughout their education. And then after 4 years, they have a higher, usually if they have higher grades, they also have a higher starting salary. So, um, and the other way around, one of the first reports that I read was that the hurt could last a lifetime for students. If we all these prolonged school closures, then you have like students that are in a dysfunctional household, and instead of teaching, they get sometimes beaten up because the father lost his or her job, or mother lost
Yeah.
a job, because
They don't have enough
all of
food.
these.
They have too much time together. You know, Jordan and I have even found, because we're more at retirement age now, you can only spend so much time
Mhm,
together, you know? And we were on the
mhm,
road traveling, and I suggested that
mhm,
I have my own hotel room. And so
mhm,
we began to do that, and we realized that it was very pleasant to have our own space, and that we could come together
mhm,
whenever we wanted. But if people are forced
mhm,
together because there's no school, and then the parents lose their jobs,
mhm.
you know, that's just a recipe for
They have a
trouble.
small flat. They don't have a lot of they don't have a big
Yeah.
garden. I was lucky to have a garden for my kid, and we could, play outside a little
Hmm.
bit.
Hmm. What if you're in an
But
apartment?
I was
Yeah.
thinking of all those poor people. And then I looked at the numbers, and the inequalities have risen a lot. I think there's about $50 trillion lost in terms of money of not only poor but also middle class
Hmm.
people, and it was almost completely transferred to rich people.
Hmm.
So the rich got a lot richer and the poor got a lot poorer, but also the middle class got a lot
Right.
poorer. And these inequalities have risen a lot. And this is a marker, historically, a very important marker for societal decline.
Right.
So just before the Roman Empire collapsed, for instance, there was a huge rise in inequalities. And you can even, a soldier and somebody of the elite, there wasn't that much difference. But just before the empire collapsed, there was a huge difference between the groups, the elite and the masses. And what you also see is two other things. One is that the elite and the masses both start to behave dysfunctionally. This is really interesting. So you also see that in a family. If the parents behave dysfunctionally, the children will also usually behave in a dysfunctional way, even if they're great children.
Hmm.
If you took them out of the situation and gave them some therapy, they might be great children. And so this is what happens on a world scale now. And the other thing is huge projects. So huge projects before. So
Mm.
we look at at the empires that we know of, and then you see that we think, oh, they have these huge buildings, and it's so beautiful and magnificent. But when were those buildings
Ah.
built? Just before the society collapsed.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Yes, yes, yes. We were just in uh Hungary. Is that where we were? Trying to think.
Hmm.
Big, big buildings. We were in Vienna. Big, big buildings. You know, like you there, and yes, those buildings were built late in the empires. Oh yeah. I
Hmm.
never thought of
Exactly.
that. Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and you also see a parallel with the current times, that we have these huge projects that the whole world needs a vaccination, the whole world need to get off these emissions.
Yeah.
So I think not of that we are building huge projects. Maybe we try to get to Mars or something. That's also something, but it's more like these projects that I see as markers of societal decline.
Uh-huh.
Actually,
And so what do you think what's a way to come back from that?
reverse it. So one is turnaround leadership. Let's say the best example I had was Nelson Mandela, actually. I think he couldn't finish what he started because he didn't live long enough, maybe. So I've been to South Africa and I see that it's not ideal there, but at least he made a good start with reversing the problems that were there. So that is one, but we tend to look at the leaders too much. So I think we all need to start using people's brains. So why do politicians come up with all the solutions? Why can't we come up with solutions? So I think a form of direct democracy coupled with really making sure that people start to think for themselves. So that's why I devised the Letters to the Future, and it's on ikigaiTV.nl. I devised that people can start to think for themselves. What is the ideal future if there were no constraints? What will our future look like if we don't change anything? And what is it that you can contribute every day? And it can be small, taking care of your neighbor or taking care of somebody is also, I think, a contribution
Well,
to
if
society.
everyone takes care of everyone else's neighbor, then everyone is taken care of.
Exactly.
Because you can think
That
of
was
it
my idea.
as local, but then you can think of it as local, but done everywhere. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why I also started a great citizens movement. So I thought, I want people. I don't want to. We don't need gurus who tell us what to do, because I'm always very skeptical if somebody knows the solution to all the problems. Then it's an ego thing usually. So what I see is that there's a lot of false prophets about, and I think it shouldn't be about an ego. It should be about the solution. So if somebody, even my 7 years old son, sometimes he has great solutions to problems. And then I thank him and say, that's so great that you thought about this, because that's the solution I needed. And I can dismiss him. You're only 7 years old. Come on. I'm not going to listen to you. That is something what happens now, I think. Governments disregard and even actively suppress solutions that society and people within society come up with.
Yes, and that,
So
there's a saying that from the Bible that I can't remember the exact saying, but where there are two or three of us in God's name, I am there. And so you can,
yes,
all you need really is a conversation with your 7-year-old, a truthful conversation with your 7-year-old, and that's what you need. I had my granddaughter here yesterday with me, and she stayed overnight with me 2 nights ago. And it was funny because I haven't been around little kids for quite a while because I've been traveling so much. And I got home and it was really good to be with her because I recognized my lack of patience. Right? Because so many questions, right? So many questions and so much energy and flitting here and there and everywhere. And of course, in my time of life, I can do one thing for a very long time, but that's not the way it is with a small child. And so I was very grateful that she was there to remind me that that my time can be different if I'm among people, right? That I have to make sure that I allow for other people so that I can be a part of and share. Yeah.
yes,
So,
yes.
you can learn
look
from
what she
anyone.
is
She's
doing.
not even 6 years old yet. Right?
Nice.
You can.
Nice. Yeah, Mike has been trying to come up with solutions for the whole problem, because I thought that was really sad in a way, because he saw that so many people were unhappy. He was kind of happy because he didn't have to go to school and he liked it and I liked playing around. But he saw that I was looking into the whole problem, and so he tried to come up with solutions. And that's actually, I thought, oh, he shouldn't be doing that at his age.
Well, I don't know.
He should be.
My grandfather died when I was 5, and my mom's dad, and we all went to the funeral. But my parents left me in the playground and gave me ice cream and went off to the funeral. And I knew that wasn't right, and I was 5 and I was
No.
like, you know what? Something really important is happening here and I'm at the playground. That just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I think that informed
No.
me to be mindful of my time
Mhm.
in the world. I really do. So I don't think it was harmful. I doubt if it was harmful to him. I think that who knows what it'll do to inspire him in his life. Who knows?
True. True.
Yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, I tried to kind of shield him from let's say the worst things.
Hmm.
Luckily, he didn't have to wear mouth masks in his school and all these
Oh,
kind of
good.
things because he was so
Good.
young. And in the Netherlands, they didn't have that rule for young kids, and I was
Oh yeah, that was terrible, wasn't
yeah.
it? Kids weren't allowed to see anyone's mouths anymore. That's a lot of how we communicate. Yeah.
Yes, I wasn't wearing them, and I think yeah, I was smiling at all the kids because I thought, how do they learn emotional expressions? How they have to learn and they have to see it. So these kids are socially impaired, at least, and some of them didn't even learn to talk. And all these effects we know, it's like impossible to list all of them.
Yeah,
Actually,
no,
there's
there's
so
no way
many.
we should do that again. When we were in Greece, we talked to a man and a woman who didn't wear masks, and they didn't want their kids to wear masks either. And their kids were young, and the father took his son out to play with another girl, and she was so scared that he wasn't wearing a mask that she
Mhm.
ran away. I mean, it was just brutal.
Oh wow. Yeah, what are we doing to
What
our
are we
children?
doing?
That
Oh, yeah, it's
yeah,
insane. We're not thinking for ourselves, and that's a big problem.
yeah, it feels like sacrificing them actually.
Yeah.
And I was, I had a very bad childhood, and I'm thinking of all these kids, who have seen the worst in people for the last couple of years
Yeah,
actually.
that's right.
As I said, everybody starts to behave dysfunctionally, except some people are really mindful of trying to not do
Hmm.
it. So yeah, that's one of the things. So one of the things is we need a turnaround leader. The second is we need to think for ourselves, I
Hmm.
think. And third is we need positive psychology interventions. And I've listed a couple on ikigai.tv.nl, and I'm for the moment I'm doing it for free and with my own money because I saw that in the Netherlands like 90% of the young people were unhappier after the lockdowns.
Hmm.
So that's ridiculous. And then, after the first lockdown, it was 87%. And I was like, okay, is that not something to be, worried about as a
Hmm.
government? That 87% of your young people state that they're more unhappy, and some of them have suicidal thoughts and all these kind of things. And later on, there was indeed a suicide increase in
Have
suicides, and
children?
it's
No.
of children and all
Oh
ages,
dear.
I think, but
Yesterday I
especially
was speaking to an author named Kitty Faust, who wrote a book called Them Before Us. And she has uh, an association that's under the name of Them Before Us. And it's about children before adults and advocating for children's natural rights, and that children have a
Mm,
natural right to their parents, to their biological parents.
yes.
And, you know, ever since I think the birth control pill, that was not children focused. That was adult focused. That decision to bring in the birth control pill and give adults the decision whether to have a child, to bring a child into the world or not, that made it
Hmm.
adult focused life. And life has gone in
Mm,
that direction. And during
hmm.
COVID lockdown, it was still what the adults wanted, and the kids were
Hmm.
subject to it, and it was brutal. Those kids, they were separated. They didn't get a chance to socialize, to learn to speak. Some of them, uh, the teenagers who needed to be together in order to bond friendships, and it was just
And I know parents who locked the kids up in their room and gave them food, in front of the door because they had COVID. I'm like, in what society do we lock our kids up up in their room? That would have been a criminal act before COVID-19, and then it became normal. And they posted it on Facebook. I'm like, what? You're locking your kid into his room for 10 days and give him food in front of the
Yeah.
door?
That's what fear can do, huh?
Huh?
That was a
Yeah.
fear-based uh yeah.
Decision. I'm just going to let the cat in.
Okay. That's somebody high in compassion who has to go let her cat in. There's a mother for you.
Compassion, that's what we need.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but
That's something we really
at
need.
home, compassion at home.
Yes, at home and everywhere, actually, because I think, love might be the antidote to fear, and because fear brings people into a survival state. And when I thought about my childhood, I was in a constant state of
Mm.
survival. And that's what actually brought back so many memories when this whole thing
Oh.
started. I felt like I was in this fear-based survival state
Mm.
again. And then after 2 weeks, I thought, this is not how I want to live. I'd rather die, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest, because I cannot cope with so much
Mm-hmm.
fear. It kind of overwhelmed me, and I couldn't think straight. And I could see that I couldn't think straight. So when my sister called me, I said, "Well, I'm sorry. You might be right, but because she said I think something's wrong, and I said you might be right, but I can't think anymore at the moment. So I need to get out of this state of fear. And yeah, I think the only opposite of fear is
Yeah.
love.
And then we have to define love, though, what love is, if we're going to talk about love. And so, how do you define love?
I Yeah, for me it's hard to define, but I think it has a lot of to do with empathy and with acceptance and with accepting people how they are. Because as soon as you start accepting people how they are different. They're also in a state of fear. They also have their own troubles. Then you kind of relax
What if
into
they're
it,
doing something that's
and
harmful? How do you love that person?
then it's that's difficult. I would intervene. I'm always a person who intervenes if somebody is harming another
Or
person,
even themselves?
um, or even themselves. Yes, and that's not about love or hate. I When I was young, I sometimes felt a lot of hate because it was for me impossible to defend
Mm-hmm.
myself, and that's why I felt a lot of hate because I wanted to change the situation and I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't. So I started to hate a
Yeah.
person
Right.
harming me. And in this situation, I felt that I didn't hate people doing this. I haven't felt hate, even though my mother died because of the measures.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I would be very, resentful after that, but I wasn't. And I didn't want to be because, all these emotions and these emotions of hate, emotions of resent, they keep you in also in the survival state or in a state of, I don't know, it's very tense, a very tense
That's for
state.
sure.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I guess I have my idea of resentment. If I'm feeling resentment, I have to look at myself to
Mhm.
see if I'm being taken advantage of or if I'm
Mhm.
not using the courage to say what I need to say or do what I need to do.
Mhm.
And so it's complicated, right?
Mhm.
In order to not have fear and not have anger, you have to be able to say what you
Mhm.
have to say, but to say
Mhm.
it in a way that's not mean, right? So maintain
Exactly.
kindness.
Exactly.
And so sometimes if I need to say something but I feel full of anger, I have to pause and
Mhm.
wait until that anger is passed before I can say what I have to
Yes.
say. And
True.
so
True.
there's a lot that people can do. And we used to learn all of that by reading the Bible. That's how we learned it. It and we've left that learning, thinking that we know enough without it. But what's going on now, I think, is the consequence of leaving all of that behind and not taking that seriously. And if everybody, you think, oh, I don't need church, and what do those pastors mean? And I can remember having those thoughts where I would go to church and think, well, what does that pastor know? He doesn't know what I am suffering from or what I need. But it's so much deeper than that. You have to actually look to the scripture and to learn the scripture. I mean, we were born into Christianity, and I found when I was ill, I had to go back to what I had learned when I was a child, when I had gone to church and Bible school and colored my coloring of Jesus Christ. I had to go back to who I was when I was young and find the lessons that I needed to learn for acceptance and for being loving and kind. I needed that to come from a good grounding, a good place. Because we think
Yes.
we know what we're
And
doing
if
and
you
we
never,
don't
and
know what
nobody
we're
ever
doing.
told you, exactly, and if never nobody ever told you about Christianity or about the Bible, then you wouldn't
Right.
know. And I had a very tough Christian upbringing, like really. The Bible and every letter in the Bible is true, and my father, I think, at least I feel like he has psychopathic
Mm.
tendencies, and it was really a bad childhood. And then in the church they always said, that if you were dying and you weren't converted, then you would go to hell. So that was my
Right.
upbringing. And so every night I didn't dare to go to sleep, because I thought, I'm so young, I haven't been converted yet because I'm too young, and so maybe if I die then I go to hell. So I couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
I was afraid to go to
Yeah.
sleep. And then my image of God was actually my father, but then 10 times worse. So basically a complete psychopath.
Right.
And so I just parked it for like about 40 years. I don't know what to do about Christianity. I think that God and the devil may be externalizations of the good and the bad that it is in every
Right.
one of us. And that's where I left it. And then in 2020, people were not allowed to congregate anymore. So I called all the pastors and all the churches in Monnikendam. We have about 7 churches, and I called each of them and I said, "Can I go to church? I want to go to church." And then they said, "No, it's not possible, and it's only for 20 people or 20 to 50 people." And I didn't want to take places of old people that wanted to go, so I didn't go, but I said to them, "Why isn't the church, how can this happen? This is impossible." And then they said, "Well, it's decided." So higher up in the hierarchy of the church, it was decided. The bishop decided it, or so the Protestant churches, they have their, I don't know, they have their decision makers also. And so I thought, okay, what is there to find that we are not allowed to see then if we're not allowed to go? Because when I'm not allowed to go, I want to go. And so that's my rebellion.
Isn't that something, huh?
And then I thought, okay, what is, if we go to the root of it, what is God? And then I thought, God is love. And then I thought, okay, that's it, basically. Everything else that we do is nice, but this is the main thing. And so I went to one church which was open in our in Monnikendam, a very small place where I live, and it was a beautiful church. And it was cold, and there was nobody there. There was a book you could write about the COVID situation or anything you wanted. And then I thought, it's almost Christmas. This church needs a little bit of singing. And I used to be in a choir, singing in the choir when I was young. The whole family was in a choir. I had 7
Oh, yeah.
siblings, also singing. And so I started to go to the front, and I started singing Christmas songs. And yeah.
And did you do that once or
Uh,
did you do that more than once?
I did it more than once, and actually I posted it on Facebook, and I said, "Well, my singing might not be the best after 40 years of not singing, but I wanted to share this with you because some people might really get inspired." And then a lot of people said that they were really, how do you say, almost brought to
Yeah.
tears by
Yeah.
it.
Oh. What a nice thing to do. Isn't that
Yeah.
mysterious, how that came about?
Yeah, and then I was my mother was dying, and on a Sunday I was there with my
Hmm.
sister, and this turned out to be the last time we saw her. And so my sister said, "What can we do? We can't talk to her anymore because she doesn't respond anymore." And I proposed to
Hmm.
sing, and she said, "What shall we sing?" And I said, "My mother was Christian, so let's sing a psalm for her." So we sang a Psalm 42 for her and I'm brought up with the 77.3, how do you say,
Hmm.
translation. So the translation from 7073, and both my sister and I both knew it, and we started to
Hmm.
sing it. And she said it really calmed my mother,
What did your sister think?
and she thought it was really nice, and yeah, we were really
Oh,
touched,
yeah.
both of
Yeah.
us, that it, especially in hindsight, because that turned out to be the last time we saw
Right.
her,
Huh.
and
That's a great story.
and since, thank
Hmm.
you, thank you. Yeah, and just before that, it was really interesting because the only thing kids want to hear from their mother or father is that they are being
Yes.
loved. And both my father nor my mother had ever said that they loved
Hmm.
me. And I had asked my mother when I was 21, she sent me a card that she loved me, but I said, I would really like you to say it for once because you've never said it
Hmm.
to me. And and then she started to become really emotional and said, I can't.
Hmm.
And so she was really honest about that. I liked that. And I said, well, I'm going to wait for you to
Hmm.
say it. And then in the end, it never happened. And then just before the last time I spoke with her, my sister asked me, "Do you want to say something to mom?" And then I said, "Yeah, I want to say I love you, mom." And I was like, I'd never said that to her before because she never said it to
Oh.
me. And then she said, "I love you a lot." And these were her
Oh,
last words to me.
wow. That's a good story.
Yeah,
Oh, that's a good
it actually
story.
is.
Man, oh man. You know, life
Yeah,
is so strange. If we let it. If
yeah,
we let it be, if we let ourselves
yeah,
just go where we need to go, life can be so interesting.
yes, yes. And then you think, I've never realized that I would have to be the one to
Right.
say it because usually you expect the mother to say it to the kid and then the kid says it back. I say it to my son, and then I think he was 2 or 3 years old. I said, "Mike, I love you." And then he was eating an ice cream. I said, "Yeah, I love ice cream." Which is
It's a
also
good
very
practice. I
nice.
think it's a good practice. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's a good.
Yeah.
My dad
So
is
I say,
92, and there was no demonstration. There was not much demonstration of love in my family. But I've recognized now in these last few years, I say, I love you, Dad. He goes, I love you, Tam. So it's really nice to share that with each other. Even if you didn't have
yeah.
it, to just, whenever you want it, to just say so. Right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and especially when you feel it,
Yeah.
because I also, my sister and I, we never had been touched by my mother because my father didn't allow
Oh,
us.
really?
So we were
Wow.
not allowed to.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I didn't know how to
Uh
do
huh.
it
Uh huh.
myself, and so I started. I decided to practice
Good
because
idea.
I didn't know how to have children.
Yeah.
And then I had a cousin who was 12, and I was living with my aunt at that time, and he was kind of, so I tried to, put my arm around him a little bit like this, and he didn't notice. So I was like, "Phew, at least he doesn't notice." Like, but I'm practicing.
Uh, so you started
And so I
practicing
started to
when you were
improve.
about 12?
No, I was 17, and I left
Yeah.
home. to live with my aunt. So I call her my second mother. And so she had 6 children, and 2 of them left the house. She asked me to come live with
Okay.
them, and I started living with them. And then I was like, I don't know
Is
how to
this your
do this. So,
mother's
and but
sister or your father's sister?
actually, it's she was married to my
Oh, okay.
father, the brother of
Oh,
my
okay.
father. So actually, she's not. They say the cold side, right? It's not
Yeah.
really
In-law. In-law. We
family, but
call those in-laws. Yeah.
in-law. Yeah. And she had been divorced. She divorced the brother of my father because he had the
Mm.
same kind of
Mm-hmm.
tendencies, a lot less than at my home. But my second mother, and so my aunt, she would say, "Hey, you can't do this to your kids." So she would intervene and protect her children. But even then, it was so impossible that she decided to
Oh,
divorce
well.
him.
Wow. She
And so
took the
I
next
started.
right step, right? I talk a
Yes,
lot about that. I
yeah.
try to live that now, taking the next right step.
Mm.
Because sometimes we don't know what to do, but we can tell what the
Mhm,
next right step is. And really, that's all you need to know.
mhm. True, true. And for her, it was really difficult because she was being excluded. How do you
Hmm.
say that? By her whole
Mm.
family. So she was kind of, nobody wanted to have, and she had a big family. So for her, she was totally alone after
Mm.
that.
And her kids?
So that
Her
was,
kids didn't.
and her kid, yeah, they were doing
Yeah.
okay. And she was trying to be a mother and a father at the same time. She was trying to earn some income. And yeah, I think she was really cool. I really admired her. Also, how she did it in the home. And actually, that was the reason why I visited her, because I said to my mother that she had to get a
Mm.
divorce. And she said, well, then we are going to be very poor. And I said, well, you have 8 children. And if these eight children will get children, they will do the same to their children. Because, dad said that he didn't want to do it to his children, but he did
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
anyway. And so this whole lineage will go on. So you have to do something. And then she started crying, and I said, "Well, you talk about my aunt Wil, that she is doing so great and that it's so nice at their family." And I hadn't been there for years, but she painted this picture of a really happy family and light and nice. And so she said, and then I said, "How is she doing it then?" Because she's been through the same situation. And then my mother said, "Why don't you ask her?" Which was a bit strange because I was 16, 17 at that time. And then I said, "Okay," and I traveled 120 kilometers to see her and to ask her how she did it. And then what happened is she asked me how our family was and how things were going at home, and I told her. And then she was so shocked that she proposed to her children, "Is it okay now that 2 children are leaving that I ask her to come live with
Mm.
us?" And I was already trying to find a foster family for myself, but yeah, I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know anything actually, because there was a huge social exclusion. So I didn't know
Right.
much. I didn't even know, how you could get help. And I did take my parents to help actually, like to therapist. How do you say
Therapist.
that? To a
Yes.
therapist. Yeah, but the therapist didn't understand the whole situation, that I was taking them to the therapist, and he sent me to a youth therapist. And I was like, no, I want my parents to, I want something to
Yeah.
change. I don't want to go to a youth therapist.
Uh,
So it was kind of
yeah.
strange.
Well,
And so I started living with my
mm,
aunt since then,
mm. That's a beautiful story too.
and learned. Yeah,
It is.
yeah. And then I learned what was normal, actually. That's what I wanted to learn. What is
Yeah.
normal?
Right. 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 And
But I still don't know, actually, what is normal.
well, I don't know. I don't know. Normal is. I don't know what's normal either. That's why I read the Bible.
Yeah, yeah. Did they also call it a new normal in the States or in Canada?
Oh, I guess they probably do.
In,
Yes, the new normal. Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't pay
in the
much
Netherlands, they
attention
called
to
it.
that.
No, me neither. But I thought it made, it was so interesting because I wanted to learn what was normal, and now they want a new
Yeah.
normal.
Right. And
I,
and they
well,
think that
I
and
still
they
don't know
think
what
they
word
can figure out
normal is.
what normal is. Good luck with that. There's no way.
Yeah, normal is. I don't know if you want everybody to be normal.
Well,
It's probably not a good idea.
I don't think it's probably a good idea because I don't think they know everybody. If the ego's in control, it's not coming from the right place. That's all I know. Yeah,
True. Yeah,
that's all I know.
true.
Well, thank you very much
Yeah.
for coming.
You're welcome.
It was good to see you again. Jordan's book is going to
Yes.
be done sometime in March. It was going to
Oh,
be
whoa.
January, but it looks like as long as it's done in the spring, that is
Mm-hmm.
good for the publisher. So he seems to keep finding things to write. So he's not done yet.
And he seems to keep finding time to write also, which is really
Amazing. Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, exactly.
Because he's not even home yet. Yeah. I don't know where he gets the energy
Well,
from. Well, I do know where he gets the energy from, but it's quite
from,
remarkable
from,
to watch.
mm,
He'll
mm-hmm.
be back.
And where does it
He'll
get
be
it from?
back tomorrow. Where does he get it from?
Yeah,
Aiming up.
from
Aiming
there. Yeah.
up.
Well, I should also aim at you a little bit. I think you support him a
Yeah,
lot.
I'm trying to aim up as well. So the more I aim up, the more he
And
aims up, the more energy we have.
that's important. Yeah, that's great to
Uh-huh.
hear.
And give
Well,
your
I
little
think we're
guy
on
a
an.
hug and tell him I love him.
I will do
Okay.
that. I'll do that.
Okay, that's a good idea.